Honestly, if I was an atheist, I would probably be an antinatalist. Hey everybody, I'm Amber, a disabled gal here to reveal or remind you that you're complete in Jesus Christ alone. So, antinatalism. Many of you might not even know what that is. I didn't know what it was until recently. Essentially, it is the belief that it is morally wrong to reproduce. This can extend beyond just people reproducing into even like breeding animals, that it's morally evil to bring new sentient beings into existence. Antinatalists have a variety of reasonings for this belief. In this video, I'm going to focus on the reason of suffering. Also, I'm going to focus on people reproducing just for the sake of clarity here. So, antinatalists have been accused many times by the disability community for being ableist. And I've heard many antinatalists deny that they are ableist, and their reasoning is because essentially they're not just singling out disabled people as we shouldn't reproduce, but also nobody should reproduce. So therefore, they're not being ableist. I'm going to come at it from an angle that I haven't heard anybody come at it from. So my interest was piqued when I was actually on a antinatalist Instagram page, and I saw this picture of a woman sitting in a wheelchair. I'm not sure if she knew that they were using her picture or not, but anyway, it said on the picture, "Me when two people did the nasty in 2004 and now I'm disabled." So essentially she's saying, my parents decided to have sex and now I'm here and I'm disabled and miserable. As far as the concept of sex being referred to as doing the nasty, I mean, I get that people call it all sorts of things, but within the covenant of marriage, it is anything but nasty. That's a topic for another day, though. Now, I'm not actually sure if the woman herself put this text on the picture or not, or if it was the antinatalist putting it on there. I have made a video somewhat recently about the concept of suffering and disability. Essentially, yes, disability does cause some suffering, discomfort, and there's going to be a giant spectrum. Like, one person might suffer a little bit, maybe some not even really at all, and then another person a lot. But honestly, the same is true for people that don't have a disability. My disability, for example, is probably on the more severe side of, disabilities. But I would say the suffering in my life is actually a lot less than even a lot of able-bodied people suffer. I've heard like horrendous stories of people suffering exponentially more than I probably ever will. I think the problem that the disability community has, and the problem that I have with this antinatalist movement, is they're using disability as kind of a prop to say, see, this is why nobody should be born. Like, just think of that. You belong to a group of people that somebody is pointing to saying, you're the reason why no human should ever reproduce, because they might make a person like you. So I think that is the beef that we have. Now, the woman in this picture, let's say she actually was who wrote that text that was on the picture. And let's say she really does, regret being born and her disability is causing her, depression. That can actually happen, and my heart goes out to anybody in that position. But again, this can happen with or without a disability. Like, this is actually a classic, kind of thing that people with depression say or think or whatever, is this concept of wishing they hadn't been born. Now, something that's very true that the antinatalists recognize is the problem of evil and the problem of suffering in the world. Now, that is a whole huge topic in and of itself, and maybe someday we will get more into that on this channel, but that would be just too much for this video. If you are interested, Answers in Genesis has some amazing articles and resources that you can look into on this issue of death and suffering and evil and all of that. But anyway, essentially, antinatalists are taking a problem, but they are posing the wrong solution. The solution they are posing is, well, if we stop reproducing, then there will be nobody that will suffer. And the more people who don't reproduce, the less amount of suffering there will be in the world. Now, the actual solution to suffering is Jesus. When Adam and Eve sinned, death, suffering, evil, even what we would call natural evil, like I would say disability falls into that category, all of that came into the world through sin, when Adam and Eve sinned. Now, Jesus was the only man who was both man and God. I know that might sound a little confusing to a non-believer, but he was fully God, fully man, and he did not sin at all. Now, the payment for our sin is death, and Jesus took that payment on our behalf on the cross. He was crucified and he died, but he didn't stay dead. He rose again on the third day. And now the resurrection is significant because it shows the payment was accepted. If Jesus wouldn't have rose, then our faith is meaningless, because that means that his payment was not accepted. So if it would have been anybody else trying to die for our sin, that wouldn't have worked, because they are also a sinner. Jesus was the only spotless lamb. So through him, through Jesus, we too will rise again one day. Anyone who calls upon his name and anyone that asks for forgiveness of their sins through Jesus will be saved. So we were created for eternity. This life isn't all that there is. But honestly, from an atheist perspective, and I'm not saying all atheists are antinatalists, I'm not saying that. But when you draw out that belief to its natural conclusion, life does become meaningless. And I could see how somebody would think it's morally wrong to bring new people into existence if, well, they might have some pleasure, but they also will suffer. So if they never exist in the first place, they won't know what pleasure is, so it's better if they just don't exist. Honestly, if I was an atheist, I would probably be an antinatalist. The book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible talks about how things are vanity or meaningless. I would encourage you to go read it. Apart from Jesus, apart from eternity, everything is meaningless. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 17 and 18 says, "For this light momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient," or translucent, transparent, "but the things that are unseen are eternal." So the suffering that we experience here on this earth, whether we are disabled or not, the suffering is nothing compared to eternity with Jesus. Now, there is a verse about somebody who Jesus actually says it would have been better off for him to not be born. So in Matthew chapter 26, verse 24, the Son of Man, referring to Jesus, goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. Whoa. So this is speaking of Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus, and ultimately that led to Jesus' crucifixion. I would encourage you to go read the Gospels to hear that whole story. Excuse me, that whole account, because it actually happened. So, wow, that's pretty intense for Judas. But really, when you think about it, anybody who is standing before Jesus on Judgment Day, when we all stand before him, anybody who is there naked in their sin, without Christ's righteousness clothing them, without his righteous blood atonement, it would have been better for them to have never been born, just like Judas. Now, I want to segue here into what exactly we were created for. What is our purpose? Isaiah chapter 43, verse 6 through 8 says, I will say to the north, give up, and to the south, do not withhold. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made. And then this is interesting. Bring out the people who are blind, yet have eyes, who are deaf, yet have ears. I think it's kind of interesting. Some disabilities are mentioned right after that. But anyway, no matter what limitations we may or may not have, we're created for his glory. Now, as far as it being immoral to have children, I want to go through some scriptures to show the Bible actually says the opposite about children. So we're going all the way back to Genesis here, the foundation. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 through 28 says, So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So obviously, if God said to be fruitful and multiply, it's obviously not a bad thing to do so. Psalm 127 verse 3 says, Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Matthew 19:14 says, But Jesus said, Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven. And it goes on. There's a lot of theological implications to having children. It really represents the gospel, how we are children of God. Even adoption represents the gospel because we are adopted into the kingdom of God. And there's many, many more verses about children, but none of them indicate that children, or that having children, creating image bearers of God, that's somehow a bad, negative thing. So I still find it insulting and unbiblical to use disability as like a example, if you can call it that, of why people should stop reproducing, because you know what, it's just the worst thing to make disabled image bearers of God. Ugh, disgusting. It does show a complete misunderstanding of what suffering even is and how it's extremely temporary, and even shows a fundamental misunderstanding in the purpose of life. And actually, that's much more concerning than just, being insulted that some people think that people like me just shouldn't be born, or using someone like me as an example why nobody should be born. So this was a pretty hefty video, but I hope it was edifying to you, and thank you so much for watching.
The video you just saw was made by Fallible Christians.
Although we diligently seek to represent the God of the Bible accurately, please understand that we are still being sanctified.
For absolute truth, please refer to the Bible.